Hi, welcome to my channel. My name is Anne and today I'm giving you my mini reviews for the books I've read in January. I didn't do wrap-ups, monthly wrap-ups type things during 2020 because in 2020 I wrote mini reviews on my blog for all of the books I read each month. But this year I want to do things a little bit differently, so I'm going to try to do wrap-ups every month and I'm going to try to do them like wrap-up on the go type things. It basically means that I'm filming my reviews for the books as the month progresses, so the rest of this video will consist of clips from me throughout January. In January I read 7 books and all of them were by female authors. This wasn't really intended, but it just turned out that way because I generally tend to read more books by female authors than books by male authors. I gave 3 books 5 stars and there was 1 reread, and that's kind of it for the stats. So without further ado, I'm giving the floor to Anne from the past. It's now Tuesday the 12th of January and on Sunday the 10th of January I finished my first book of the year, which was Wundersmith by Jessica Townsend. This is the sequel to Nevermore, the first book in what I think will be a 7-part series. I think I've read that somewhere, which is great because I love this series. But I'm not going to go into the plot of Wundersmith because that would spoil Nevermore. But for those of you who don't know what Nevermore is about, it's about a girl called Morrigan Crow who believes she is cursed and destined to die on the eve of her 11th birthday. But when that eve rolls around, she is whisked away by a very wonderful and remarkable man called Jupiter North, and he takes her to the magical city of Nevermore, with her permission, by the way, I should add. And there she learns about the Wondrous Society, which is a society full of people with special talents, and she enters the competition to become a part of the Wondrous Society. And that's basically what the first book is about. And the first book was one of my favorite books I read in 2020. I'll leave the link to that video down below and up above. But now on to Wundersmith. I didn't love this one as much as I did Nevermore, because with Nevermore there was all this wonder at the magic of the story and experiencing all of it with Morrigan for the first time. And there was still a lot of that in Wundersmith, but for some reason I was just a little less enthralled and amazed by it all. Nevertheless, I still gave this 4 stars because I still think this is a very wonderful series and I love Morrigan as the main character. That's one of my favorite aspects of this book. She is such a cool main character. She's very grumpy at times, which is understandable when you know everything that she's been through and that she's still going through. But she's just grumpy by nature as well, I think. She wears only black. She's into creepy stuff and she can be very sarcastic, which I love. I also love her best friend Hawthorne a lot, and of course Jupiter and his nephew Jack. I did wish that we would have gotten a bit more Jupiter and Jack in this book and a bit more story to take place in the Deucalion, which is the hotel that Jupiter owns and that Jupiter and Morrigan live in. I love the Deucalion. There was a lot of it in Nevermore, a little bit less so in Wundersmith, and I thought that was a bit of a pity. I also thought that the plot of this one felt a bit more scattered than the plot of the first book. Everything came together in the end and in a really good way, I think, but while reading I just thought there was a lot going on in a lot of different directions and I didn't really know what to make of it. And while I enjoyed how everything came together at the end, it did influence my reading experience of the book a little bit. Having said that, what I really enjoyed about this book is how on the surface it's very clear who is good and who is evil, but when you dig a little bit deeper into the story you see that there's a lot of questioning going on of this dichotomy between good and evil, and I really like that. I thought that was very well done and I really hope that the rest of the series continues in that vein because I would love to see that be explored even more. I do really want to continue this series and I can't wait to see where the story goes. It's now Sunday the 17th of January and yesterday I finished my most highly anticipated read of 2021 and my first 5-star read of the year, and that's Concrete Rose by Angie. This is a prequel to The Hate You Give, and if you've read The Hate You Give you know that the main character in that book is Star, and this book tells the story of her father. He's a 17-year-old boy in this book. And like I said, this was a 5-star read for me. I absolutely loved this book. I adored The Hate You Give. I thought it was an amazing book. It was one of my favorite reads of 2017, I think. It was such an important book and I was so glad that it received the praise and the attention that it got. And I hope the same will be true for Concrete Rose because I think this is a very important story too. It's about Maverick Carter. He is 17 years old. His father is in prison because of gang-related things and his mother works 2 jobs to support him and their little family, and he also wants to do his part. He is part of the same gang, the King Lords, as his father was, basically mostly for protection because he doesn't live in a safe neighborhood. He lives in Garden Heights. But Maverick also deals drugs because he just can't find a way to make enough money to support his mother. And then he finds out that he has a 3-month-old son and his whole life is turned upside down. And this basically explores what it's like for him as a 17-year-old boy who's still in high school to have a son, to have to take care of that son all of a sudden, to live up to expectations from his mother, from his father in prison, from other people, both low expectations from outsiders and high expectations from the people around him. And then something horrible happens and he also has to deal with grief on top of all of that. And the book shows a very vulnerable side of him as well. And this was so well written, the pacing of the plot was great as well, and I just felt this constant sense of suspense and of urgency because Maverick is fully aware that life in Garden Heights is not safe, especially not for a gang member, and Angie Thomas very subtly transmits that feeling of danger and suspense to the reader through her writing, which shows what an amazing writer she is. So it was a very good book in terms of writing, in terms of plot, but also showing a young black man as a vulnerable human being. It humanizes the young black male experience, especially the young black male experience in rough neighborhoods, because as Angie Thomas said in an interview as well, young black men are often not seen as human beings, as boys. They are seen as threats, and that's why so many bad things happen to them, and that needs to change. And this shows a perspective of a young black man living his life, doing the best with the opportunities he is given and the life he is born into, and it does an amazing job. But yeah, 5-star read. I will be surprised if this doesn't end up in my top 10 favorite books of 2021. It's now Saturday the 23rd of January, and 2 days ago, on Thursday the 21st of January, I finished 2 books. I've been reading both of them since the start of the month, so it's not like I suddenly read all that much, but I just happened to finish them on the same day. And the first one was Solitaire by Alice Oseman, which I listened to on audio, and this is Alice Oseman's debut novel, and it centers around Tory Spring. And I wanted to read this because this is the first novel that Nick and Charlie from Heartstopper feature in as well. Heartstopper is a graphic novel series that Alice Oseman also writes. It's very popular here on BookTube, and I love it very much as well, and I love Nick and Charlie. And Tori, the main character from Solitaire, makes some cameos in Heartstopper as well, but she's not a very prominent character. But I wanted to read Solitaire to get to know more about her because she seemed cool in Heartstopper, and I wanted to see Nick and Charlie in their earliest renditions. And apart from Solitaire, I've also read 2 of Alice Oseman's other novels, Radio Silence and Loveless, and I really liked both of those. But unfortunately, Solitaire just wasn't really for me. I ended up giving it 3 stars, but I think it's more of a low 3 stars than a high 3 stars, if that makes sense. The story is entirely told from Tori's perspective, and it's really about her inner turmoil and her world. And I just really didn't mesh with her as a main character, which doesn't work well for a story that's entirely about that character and what they go through. I could see that she had a very difficult time and that she had some struggles to go through and probably some mental health problems as well. And I could sympathize with that. But I also thought she was just very annoying and didn't treat people well, and the only thing I really liked about her is how she and Charlie interacted. Charlie is her little brother. I really liked that. I really like Michael Holden as a character, and I always like Alice Oseman's writing. But overall the story just wasn't really for me, and I didn't think the plot was anything really all that special either. It was kind of original. It's about this anonymous group or person called Solitaire who kind of keeps the school in its grip because it keeps hacking into school systems and playing music, and there are all these pranks involved that get progressively more serious, and this is somehow tied together with Tori, but it wasn't all that intriguing to me. So I gave it 3 stars. It was fine. I'm still a fan of Alice Oseman. I'm really excited about the Netflix show that they're making of Heartstopper, but as for this novel, I'm probably just going to forget about it rather quickly. So then we're moving on to the second book I finished this week, and that's The Dreamers by Karen Thompson Walker. I read this on my Kindle, which is why I don't have a copy to show you. And I read this for the Buzzword Reading Challenge, which is hosted by Books and Lala. If you want to know more about that challenge, I'll leave my video with my reading plans up above or down below, and I'll also leave the link to Kayla's video explaining it all. But it basically means that every month you're reading one book or several books, it's up to you, with a certain buzzword in the title, and this month the buzzword was dream, and I didn't really have any books on my shelves with the word dream in it that I hadn't already read, so I went to look for another book and I came across The Dreamers, and I bought it for my Kindle because it sounded like something that was right up my alley, and I was completely right because I ended up giving this 5 stars. my second 5-star novel of the year, so this is going very well. And this novel actually ended up being very interesting to read in the current times with the corona pandemic, because this is about a town in California in which a virus starts to roam around, and this virus causes people to fall asleep and not wake up, and it causes very high levels of brain activity, which causes the doctors and the scientists and everyone to believe that these people are dreaming very vividly. And it was just a very interesting story. Anything that involves dreams or the paradox of reality or the instability of reality is just entirely my jam, and this was too, and I loved it. The writing was absolutely superb. It has a very interesting structure and writing style because there are several main characters, quite a few of them actually, so you get to see the story from their eyes, but there's also this narrator who's more like an omniscient narrator who looks at it from after the facts, from after the events, after they have unfolded. But that means that you're switching from very intimate scenes about these characters who are experiencing this very strange and fearful time in their own ways, because you have a child of about 12 years old, you have a couple who have a newborn daughter who have their own worries, there's an old professor, there are several different types of people, all very different, all very interesting to hear from. But then you're switching from those intimate moments to more of a panoramic view of the entire town, of everything that is happening, everything that's happening outside of the town, in the rest of America. Because as the virus spreads to the town, the rest of America gets word of it, and all eyes are focused on the town, of course, because it's very strange. So switching between those two extremes was very interesting, a very good structure for this kind of novel, I think. And because of the times we're living through now, there was definitely another layer added to it, because I really recognized the way people reacted to this virus, the fear they're experiencing, how some people don't believe it's really all that bad, how some people are thinking it's a hoax. It's really everything that we're seeing with the corona pandemic. And this book was written before the corona pandemic, so I thought she painted the picture of how something like this, a situation like this, works very well. It was at times harrowing, it was beautiful, and I really, really loved it. It's now Saturday the 30th of January and I'm still in my bathrobe because it's the weekend, but it feels like I'm appearing in my bathrobe in almost half of my videos now, but I guess that's lockdown life for you. But yesterday, on the 29th of January, I finished my reread of The Hate You Give by Angie, and I just noticed that my bookmark is still in there because I listened to the last part on audiobook. I read about half of this in my physical battered copy that I lent out to everyone because I wanted everyone to read it after I first read it. I have a pretty hardback copy, but I wanted to read this one to keep that one neat. But like I said, I read about half of it physically and the other half I listened to on audio, which was such a wonderful experience because the audiobook is narrated by someone named Bonnie Turpin, and she's narrated a lot of audiobooks and she's so good. She made it such an amazing experience and I absolutely adore this novel. That's no news to anyone, I think. I gave this 5 stars again, of course, but the audiobook just made it an even better experience in terms of a reread and experiencing it in a new way. I read this for the first time in 2017 and I adored it back then, but since then I didn't reread it. But after finishing Concrete Rose earlier this month, I really wanted to read this too, and I'm so happy that I did, because I remembered that I loved this book very, very much and that I thought it was such an important novel and that it should be a modern classic. But rereading this really rekindled my love for this book, because what you remember, or what I remembered from this book mostly, was that it is about police brutality and about racism and about this rough neighborhood where Star lives with her family and her role in the death of her friend, or not really her role, but the fact that she witnessed her friend being murdered by a police officer. I think that's what most people remember from this novel, and the other parts get overshadowed a little bit, which is completely understandable, but there are so many more good parts about this book. I love how much it focuses on family. Star adores her parents, even though she does call her mother the dictator a few times because they are strict sometimes, but they also just love their kids so very much, and that's so beautiful to see. And the dialogue is amazing, the writing style is brilliant, and I remembered and I knew that this was one of my favorite books, or at least one of my favorite YA contemporaries, but rereading it really made me remember why. It's now the 31st of January and today I managed to finish 2 more books before the end of the month, which is great. And the first of those 2 books is Crowns of Croswald by D.E. Knight. I was sent a copy of this by the publisher in exchange for an honest review, and I read it over the past few days. It was a really quick read. This is a middle grade fantasy novel, although it might actually be young adult, but it read more like a middle grade. The main character is Ivy Lovely, who works as a maid in a big castle. She doesn't have any family, she's an orphan, and she doesn't really like her life. But then one day she gets kicked out of the castle and she decides to go off on an adventure on her own because she doesn't have anywhere else to go. And then she is found by the people of a magical school, and she is taken there because it turns out that she has magic inside of her, in her blood, something like that. And what follows is Ivy figuring out more about herself, about magic, about her history, and that's the story. This is the first in a series. I think there are now 3 books out, and I'm not sure if it is a trilogy or if there will be more of them. And I'm also not sure yet if I'm going to read the other books, because although I did enjoy The Crowns of Croswald, I did have some issues with it. The thing that I loved about this book was the atmosphere and the imaginative nature of the book. There are so many fun little details about this world, and the magic system feels very original and whimsical and fun. It feels like the perfect kind of magic system for a children's book, a middle grade novel, and I really loved that about it. Magic is basically divided between 2 types of people. You've got the royals, who gain their magic through magical stones once they turn 16, I think, and there are the scrivenists, who have magic in their blood inside of them, and because of that they get to go to the school and learn more about the scrivenist life, basically. And that was a really fun aspect of the book. I love the focus on books and all the different ways the magic works and the different classes that Ivy follows. But other than that, there were quite a few things that I didn't really like. First of all, there were the characters. Ivy is the main character. She's 16 years old, but she felt more like a 12-year-old girl, I have to say. We don't really get to know that much about her. She doesn't really have that much of a personality, I thought, besides being very reckless and curious, which is fun, but I'd have liked it if there was a bit more about her. And then there are the friends she makes at the school. They didn't really have any personalities of themselves either. They were just pretty flat characters, I felt, and I think maybe that will develop more in the rest of the series. And this story was more focused on Ivy's story and Ivy's plot, but I just felt that that part fell a bit flat. I also thought that the pacing was a bit off, especially in the beginning. Things happened very fast and there was very little time to adjust to the new information for the reader, but also for Ivy. She just kind of went with it, even though the things that were happening were really weird and really unexpected, and that just felt a little bit unbelievable to me, that she would just go with everything even though she didn't have any information at all about what was happening to her. So the plot and the pacing together just felt a bit off, and combine that with the fact that I didn't think that the dialogue was very good, it wasn't the best reading experience. But because the world is so cool, I kind of want to keep going and see where it goes, so I'm a bit torn. I ended up giving this 3 stars because I enjoyed it, but if I'm being entirely honest, I think there are so many more books that I really want to read that I probably won't get to the other books in this series. That brings us to the last book I finished in January, and that is She is Fierce by Ana Sampson. This is a poetry collection, and it's a collection of brave, bold and beautiful poems by women. This is also the first book on my list of 10 books I have to read in 2021 that I can cross off. I ended up giving this 4 stars, but I really didn't know how to rate an anthology of poems by so many different women. Some poems I really liked, some poems I really didn't. That's just the way of things, I think. But I really like the fact that there is a book of poetry by women, that it is presented as brave, bold and beautiful. The poems are divided by different topics. So there's an entire section of poems about friendship and about love, but also about courage, protest and resistance, for example. Just all these different sections, and within those sections you have poems by women from all over the world. Although I think there is a focus on poems from British and American authors. There are some translated poems, but I think there were only a handful of them. There are a few things that I think could have made this collection a bit more readable. For example, I really would have liked it if Ana Sampson had added the years in which these poems were written with the poems. Right now you have no idea when these poems were written, except if you read the biographies of the authors in the back. But other than that, I really enjoyed this anthology. I can really recommend it if you're into poetry. I don't read all that much poetry, but I really enjoyed getting into it a bit more again. I noticed that this book doesn't really have that many ratings on Goodreads, and I think that's a shame, because I think a lot of women and men would really enjoy this. So if you're looking for some poetry to read, I think this would be a great one. And I also think that this makes a great gift. I actually got this as a gift for my boyfriend and I really enjoyed it. So that's it for my January wrap up. If you enjoyed this wrap up, please let me know in the comments, or if you've read any of these books that I talked about and what was your favorite book you read in January. Please like this video if you liked it and subscribe to my channel if you want to see more of my videos in the future, and have a wonderful day. Bye!